Captain Eliza Chen squinted as the blinding white light of the holding cell dimmed to reveal a towering figure. The alien of Vraxian ambassador, if their elaborate exoskeleton was any indication, stood nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 upper appendages and skin that shimmered like polished obsidian beneath the artificial light. Human, the ambassador's translation device rendered in a flat, metallic tone. Your presence has been requested by the Grand Council. Eliza rose from her cot, stretching muscles that had atrophied during her 6-month captivity following the ambush and destruction of her research vessel, the UNSC Curiosity. She was the sole survivor. And here I thought I'd been forgotten, she said, voice raspy from disuse. The Vraxian tilted its elongated head. Impossible. Your kind is memorable. A backhanded compliment, she supposed. The Vraxian Collective had encountered humanity only 15 years prior, and the relationship had been tense from the start. Humans expanded too quickly, adapted too readily, and worst of all, from the Collective's perspective, they innovated constantly. 2 silent guards flanked her as she was led through the labyrinthine corridors of the station. The Vraxian Collective's architectural style favored function over form, sleek, efficient, and utterly devoid of the creative touches that characterized human spaces. No art adorned these walls. No plant softened the harsh angles. It was, Eliza thought, a perfect reflection of the species itself. The council chamber was a vast hemispherical room with curved walls displaying real-time feeds from across Vraxian territory. 12 high-ranking Vraxians sat in a semicircle, their biomechanical chairs adjusting continuously to maintain optimal posture. At the center sat the Grand Arbiter, distinguished by the elaborate neural crown encircling its cranial ridge. Captain Eliza Chen of Earth, the Grand Arbiter's voice reverberated through the chamber. You stand as representative of your species in a matter of grave importance. Eliza stood straight-backed, chin lifted. I wasn't aware I'd been appointed humanity's spokesperson. You have not, the Arbiter clarified. You are merely the most convenient specimen available. Lucky me, Eliza muttered. The Arbiter continued as though she hadn't spoken. The Collective has observed your species with growing concern. Your rapid technological advancement, your unpredictable behaviors, your biological resilience, these traits make you uniquely dangerous to galactic stability. One of the counselors gestured, and a holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber. It showed a 3-dimensional map of human expansion from Earth outward. 15 standard cycles, another counselor noted. From single-planet confinement to 27 colonized worlds. No other species in recorded history has expanded at such a rate. We're adaptable, Eliza said simply. You are invasive, corrected the Arbiter. Your species originated on what we classify as a Category 5 death world. The environmental pressures that shaped human evolution have created organisms with capabilities that threaten the established order. The holographic display shifted to show physiological comparisons between humans and various collective species. Human endurance, pain tolerance, and adaptive learning were highlighted in alarming red. Your ability to survive conditions that would kill most sentient beings is concerning, the Arbiter continued. The Collective has therefore reached a decision. Eliza felt a chill run down her spine. And what decision is that? Humanity will face the Gauntlet of Ascension. Murmurs rippled through the council. Eliza frowned. I'm not familiar with this gauntlet. It is an ancient protocol, explained the Arbiter, designed to determine whether an emergent species is ready for full integration into galactic society. No species has successfully completed it in over 10,000 years. And if we fail? The Arbiter's compound eyes fixed on her. Then humanity will be contained. Your expansion will be halted. Your technologies will be appropriated. Your threat will be neutralized. Eliza's fists clenched at her sides. That sounds an awful lot like extinction to me. Not extinction, corrected a counselor. Management. The Arbiter rose from its chair, towering over her. You, Captain Chen, will be our first test subject. The Gauntlet is designed as a 100-year survival course, testing intelligence, adaptability, and cooperation. No single being has ever completed it. Most species send generations of their finest specimens. Eliza laughed, a short, bitter sound. And you expect me to undertake a 100-year test? Humans rarely live past 150, even with our best medical technology. That, said the Arbiter, is precisely why you are an ideal candidate. Your limitations will demonstrate the futility of human resistance to collective guidance. And if I refuse? Then we proceed immediately to containment protocols. Your homeworld would be the first target. Eliza's blood ran cold. She thought of Earth, of rainforests and deserts, of crowded streets and quiet meadows, of her parents' home in Seattle where the rain pattered against greenhouse domes. She thought of humanity's tenacity, its drive to explore and understand, its fundamental refusal to be contained. I accept your challenge, she said finally. But I want something in return. The Arbiter seemed taken aback. You are not in a position to negotiate, human. I think I am. You need me to validate your decision. If you force me, how will you know if I'm really trying? Give me access to a quantum communicator. Let me warn Earth about what's happening. The council members exchanged glances, their exoskeletons clicking softly as they communicated via subsonic frequencies beyond human hearing. Granted, the Arbiter said at last. Though it changes nothing. The gauntlet begins at dawn. Alone in her preparation chamber, Eliza sent her message through the quantum communicator. The technology was instantaneous across any distance, one of the few advantages the Vraxians still held over human science. This is Captain Eliza Chen of the UNSC Curiosity to Earth Central Command. I'm alive, but that might not last. The Vraxian Collective has sentenced humanity to something called the Gauntlet of Ascension, a test they're confident will fail. If we do, they plan to contain us, which means war or worse. I'm going in as their first test subject tomorrow. She paused, considering her next words carefully. I don't know what I'm facing, but I do know this: they've underestimated us. They see our adaptability as a threat rather than a strength. They don't understand that what makes us dangerous is exactly what's going to save us. Eliza took a deep breath. I'm going to beat their test. But just in case I don't, you need to prepare. Study everything we know about Vraxian technology. Find their weaknesses. And she smiled grimly, remind them why Deathworlders are not to be trifled with. Chen out. She sent the message and settled onto the preparation couch. A medical Vraxian approached with a tray of implements. These injections will allow us to monitor your vital functions during the gauntlet, it explained. The nanites will also suppress your pain responses to prevent unnecessary suffering. Eliza raised an eyebrow. How considerate. It is not consideration. It is efficiency. Death from shock serves no evaluative purpose. As the cold metal of the injection pressed against her neck, Eliza found herself wondering what exactly awaited her in the gauntlet. One thing was certain: the Vraxians had just made the mistake of backing humanity into a corner, and cornered animals fight the hardest. The Gauntlet of Ascension was housed in a massive station orbiting a neutron star. From the approach shuttle, Eliza could see that the structure was roughly cylindrical, rotating slowly to generate artificial gravity. Its exterior was unmarked except for various docking ports and sensor arrays. Impressive, isn't it? Said Administrator Kex, her Vraxian escort. The station contains over 500 distinct environments, each designed to test different aspects of sentient capability. Eliza studied the imposing structure. How many participants are typically inside at once? At the height of the last major testing cycle, 10,000 representatives from 30 species occupied the gauntlet simultaneously. Generations lived and died within, passing knowledge to their descendants. But I'm going in alone. Kex made a clicking sound that the translator didn't bother interpreting. Yes. The Council believes this will adequately demonstrate the limitations of your kind. The shuttle docked with a pneumatic hiss. Eliza was led through a series of airlocks into a white, featureless room where several Vraxian technicians waited with various diagnostic tools. The rules are simple, Kex explained. You must navigate from the entry point to the terminus. Along the way, you will face challenges testing physical endurance, cognitive ability, ethical reasoning, and cooperative potential. Cooperative? Eliza frowned. But I'm alone. Indeed. An unfortunate limitation of your case. Kexa's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement. You will have access to basic supplies at designated checkpoints. Beyond that, you must rely on your own capabilities. A technician approached with what looked like a thin metallic circlet. This will monitor your neural patterns and vital signs, Kex explained. It cannot be removed once the gauntlet begins. Eliza submitted to the technician's ministrations, her mind racing. One human, alone, expected to complete a test designed for multiple generations. It was absurd, which meant the Vraxians had already decided humanity's fate. This was theater, nothing more, unless she could prove them wrong. How will you determine success? She asked as they led her toward the gauntlet's entrance. Completion of all domains within established parameters, Kex replied. Though no individual has ever advanced beyond domain 327. And how many domains are there in total? 1,000. Eliza laughed. Well, no sense in doing things halfway. The final airlock opened onto a barren landscape that reminded Eliza of pictures she'd seen of Mars before terraforming. Red dust stretched to the horizon, broken only by jagged rock formations. The artificial sky above simulated a dim, dying sun. Domain 1, announced Kex from behind her. Survival in resource scarcity. The airlock sealed shut with a decisive click, leaving Eliza alone. She took stock of her situation. They'd provided her with a jumpsuit made of some durable material, but no tools or weapons. The air was breathable but thin, similar to Earth's atmosphere at high altitude. The gravity felt slightly heavier than Earth-standard. In the distance, perhaps 5 kilometers away, a structure rose from the dust. That, she decided, would be her first destination. The trek was grueling. The loose soil made each step laborious, and the thin air left her gasping. By the time she reached the structure, a simple obelisk of black material, her lungs burned and her muscles screamed in protest. The obelisk was featureless except for a small depression at its base. When Eliza knelt to examine it, she found a container holding a single seed and a vial of clear liquid. Interesting, she murmured. Resource scarcity, huh? She surveyed the barren landscape again, this time with new eyes. The test wasn't just about surviving the harsh environment, it was about transforming it. Eliza planted the seed in the red soil and carefully measured the liquid, using only half to water it. Within minutes, the seed sprouted, growing with unnatural speed into a crystalline plant structure that split the soil around it. At its center formed a transparent pod containing what looked like water. She cracked the pod open carefully and dipped a finger in the liquid, then touched it to her tongue. Fresh water, and quite a lot of it. Clever, she said, filling a pouch she tore from the lining of her jumpsuit. But where's the next domain? As if in response, the plant's crystalline structure began to emit a soft blue light, pulsing in a specific direction. Eliza smiled. Follow the light. Sure, why not? She traveled for 3 days across the Martian-like terrain, rationing her water and using the crystalline plants to generate more when needed. The landscape gradually shifted, becoming more hospitable as she progressed, a subtle reward for solving the first puzzle. At what she estimated was the 30-kilometer mark, she encountered another obelisk. This one opened to reveal a simple puzzle box made of interlocking geometric shapes. It took her 5 hours of concentrated effort to solve it, her fingers blistered and raw by the end. When the final piece clicked into place, a section of ground nearby sank into a stairwell leading down. Domain 2, I presume, Eliza muttered as she descended into darkness. The next 72 hours blurred together as Eliza navigated domain after domain. There were physical challenges that tested the limits of human endurance, climbing sheer cliffs in crushing gravity, swimming through viscous liquids that resisted every movement, running mazes where the air itself seemed to thicken and push back. There were puzzles that forced her to reconsider fundamental mathematical principles, linguistic challenges that required her to decode alien communication systems, and ethical dilemmas presented through sophisticated simulations. By the time she reached Domain 12, Eliza was operating on stimulants extracted from fungal growths she'd discovered in Domain 7. Her body was holding up barely, but her mind remained sharp, driven by the knowledge that Earth's future hung in the balance. Domain 12 proved to be a lush jungle environment teeming with predatory life forms. The air was thick with humidity and strange spores that made her vision blur at the edges. According to her chronometer, she'd been in the Gauntlet for just over 5 Earth days. 5 days, 12 domains, she thought. At this rate, it would take more than a year to complete all 1,000 domains. Definitely not the 100 years they predicted, but still, a movement in the underbrush snapped her attention back to the present. Something large was stalking her, something that registered as heat signatures through the dense foliage. Eliza gripped the spear she'd fashioned from materials in previous domains. The creature that burst from the jungle was unlike anything she'd seen on Earth. 6-limbed, with a segmented body covered in iridescent scales and multiple compound eyes, it moved with frightening speed. Eliza didn't hesitate. She hurled her spear with precision born of desperate practice in earlier domains. The weapon struck true, piercing what she hoped was a vital area. The creature shrieked a high, keening sound that made her ears ring but kept coming. Great. Now what? She backed away, searching frantically for an escape route. Her back hit something solid, another obelisk, this one covered in vines and moss. Unlike the previous markers, this one had clear inscriptions, mathematical formulas etched into its surface. As the wounded creature charged, Eliza's mind raced. The formula described harmonic frequencies. Understanding flashed through her exhausted brain. She picked up a fallen branch and struck the obelisk in a specific pattern, matching the resonance frequency described by the equations. The sound rang out, clear and piercing. The effect was immediate. The creature froze, its compound eyes swiveling in confusion. Then it collapsed, its nervous system apparently overloaded by the specific frequency. Eliza approached cautiously, spear at the ready, but the creature was immobilized. She examined the obelisk more carefully and found a hidden compartment containing a small device that looked like a flute. Sound-based weaponry, she murmured. Useful. She fashioned a crude sling to carry the instrument and continued deeper into the jungle, using the flute to ward off further predators. By the time she reached the transition to Domain 13, she had mastered several different resonance patterns, each affecting different species in the environment. The next domain was a stark contrast, a crystalline labyrinth where sound traveled in unpredictable ways, bouncing off surfaces to create disorienting echoes. But with her newly acquired understanding of harmonics, Eliza navigated it in hours rather than days. Domain 14 tested her ability to communicate with non-humanoid intelligences, floating gaseous entities that responded only to specific thought patterns. She adapted quickly, drawing on techniques developed during first contact situations back on Earth. Domain 15 was pure mathematics, multidimensional equations that had to be solved while the environment itself shifted according to her answers. A wrong solution meant gravity inversions or sudden temperature drops. By Domain 20, Eliza had settled into a rhythm. Analyze, adapt, overcome. The Vraxians had designed these tests for methodical, multi-generational approaches. They hadn't accounted for human improvisation and the particular pressure of facing extinction. When she reached Domain 50 on her 12th day in the Gauntlet, alarms began to sound throughout the structure. In the observation chamber, chaos reigned. Vraxian technicians moved frantically between monitoring stations while council representatives demanded explanations. Impossible, sputtered Administrator Kex, mandibles clicking rapidly in agitation. No individual has ever progressed beyond Domain 30 in less than a standard year. The Grand Arbiter stood motionless, compound eyes fixed on the main display tracking Chen's progress. How is she solving the cognitive reversal challenges so quickly? She isn't solving them conventionally, replied one of the technicians. She's bypassing them. Finding alternative approaches we didn't anticipate. In Domain 42, she reprogrammed the environmental controls by using resonance feedback from Domain 12, added another technician. A solution that should be impossible without advanced knowledge of our systems. She's learning, the Arbiter said, voice unervingly calm amidst the chaos. Adapting to the Gauntlet itself rather than merely surviving each domain. Kex's exoskeleton rattled with anxiety. Should we terminate the test? This was meant to demonstrate human limitations, not, no, interrupted the Arbiter. We will observe. This development requires further analysis. On the screens, Eliza Chen entered Domain 51, her movements efficient despite visible exhaustion. The monitoring systems showed elevated stress hormones, sleep deprivation, and minor injuries, yet her cognitive function remained remarkably stable. "Activate the accelerated sequence," ordered the Arbiter suddenly. Kex froze. "Grand Arbiter, the accelerated sequence is designed to drive candidates to failure. It compresses multiple domain challenges into single environments." "Precisely. If the human can truly adapt as quickly as she appears to, let us see the limits of that adaptation." With reluctance, Kex entered the command sequence. On the screens, Domain 51 began to shift, its parameters merging with elements from domains 60 through 70. "May the ancestors forgive us," whispered Kex. Eliza knew something had changed the moment the environment shifted around her. Domain 51 had been a relatively straightforward physics problem navigating variable gravity wells to reach a central platform. But suddenly, the air filled with microscopic particles that began reassembling the very terrain beneath her feet. "They're changing the rules," she realized, jumping aside as a gravity well collapsed and reformed with twice the intensity. "Good. That means I'm making them nervous." The new combined challenge was vastly more complex. Not only did she need to navigate gravitational anomalies, but now she also faced atmospheric pressure changes, radiation spikes, and temporal distortions that made planning ahead nearly impossible. Eliza closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. The Vraxians valued order, predictability, gradual progression. Their tests reflected these values. But humans thrived in chaos. She began moving again, this time abandoning the methodical approach she'd been using. Instead, she relied on instinct and momentum, allowing her body to react to changes milliseconds before her conscious mind processed them. It was like surfing a tsunami, terrifying, exhilarating, and impossible to control completely. When she reached the central platform 2 hours later, bleeding from a dozen small wounds and with a possibly cracked rib, a voice echoed through the domain for the first time since she'd entered the gauntlet. "Human," the metallic tones of a Vraxian translator rendered, "you have exceeded expected parameters." Eliza grinned through blood-streaked teeth. "Is that Vraxian for, good job?" "It is an observation, not praise," the voice replied coolly. "You have now reached a point beyond which no individual has progressed. The challenges ahead were designed for collective intelligence, not singular effort." "Then I guess I'll be breaking new ground." Eliza winced as she probed her injured side. "Unless you're calling off your test." A pause. The gauntlet continues. The next domain materialized around her, a vast sea of information represented as geometric shapes floating in a void. Each shape contained complex data structures that interacted with others in patterns too intricate for a single mind to track. Or so the Vraxians believed. Eliza had spent 3 years on a deep space research vessel with minimal crew. Isolation and information overload were familiar companions. She began categorizing the data nodes, identifying patterns, creating mental shortcuts. By the time she reached Domain 100, a simulation of diplomatic negotiations with 15 different alien species simultaneously, she had been in the gauntlet for 20 days. Her body was failing, malnutrition and exhaustion had taken their toll. But her mind remained sharp, fueled by stimulants she'd synthesized and the burning determination to save her species. The diplomatic simulation was particularly difficult. Each species had different communication protocols, cultural taboos, and negotiation styles. A misstep with any one could derail the entire process. Eliza approached it differently than the Vraxians expected. Instead of trying to please all parties, she deliberately created controlled conflicts between certain factions, then positioned herself as a mediator. The technique allowed her to form alliances, isolate problematic delegations, and ultimately achieve consensus through a series of smaller agreements rather than one grand treaty. When she completed the domain, she collapsed from exhaustion, allowing herself a few hours of fitful sleep before pressing on. Domain 101 confronted her with her greatest challenge yet, a seemingly unwinnable scenario where she needed to distribute limited medical resources among thousands of simulated patients, each with different survival probabilities and societal roles. The Vraxian solution would have been purely mathematical, calculating maximum utility with cold precision. But Eliza recognized the test for what it was, a challenge to her humanity itself. She worked through the scenario meticulously, refusing to reduce lives to numbers. She created a triage system that balanced medical need with broader impacts, implemented preventative measures to stretch resources, and organized the simulated population to assist in treatment delivery. When the domain finally registered completion after 30 exhausting hours, Eliza was shaking with fatigue. But the solution she'd created had saved 78% of the simulated population, far above the expected outcome. "Your approach was unexpected," the Vraxian voice commented as she prepared to enter the next domain. "That's kind of our thing," Eliza replied hoarsely. "The collective analyzed your solution. It prioritized what our models would classify as hope over statistical optimization." Eliza smiled tiredly. "Hope is a resource too. One your models don't account for." The voice fell silent as Domain 102 materialized a quantum computing challenge that required manipulating probability states to solve an encryption that should have taken centuries to break. Eliza tackled it with the same improvisational approach, finding shortcuts and exploiting patterns that emerged from seemingly random processes. She completed it in 18 hours. By Domain 200 reached on her 35th day in the Gauntlet, something fundamental had changed. The challenges were no longer merely difficult, they were specifically designed to target human weaknesses. Environments hostile to mammalian physiology. Puzzles that exploited known cognitive biases in human reasoning. Ethical dilemmas calibrated to human moral frameworks. They're adapting to me, Eliza realized with grim amusement. Just as I'm adapting to their test, the irony wasn't lost on her. The very adaptability the Vraxians feared was allowing her to progress through their impossible gauntlet, and now they were demonstrating their own version of it by modifying the challenges specifically to counter her. It became a chess match between Eliza and the unseen Vraxian controllers. They would present a challenge targeting a specific weakness. She would find an unexpected approach that turned that weakness into a strength. They would recalibrate. She would adapt again. Domain 300 tested her ability to navigate social structures among a simulated alien society with constantly shifting hierarchies and alliances. Domain 400 required her to develop novel scientific theories to explain phenomena that operated outside normal physical laws. Domain 500 challenged her to predict chaotic systems with millions of variables. Each domain grew more difficult, more specifically tailored to exploit human limitations. And yet, Eliza continued to advance. By the 60th day, she had reached Domain 700. Her body was a shell of its former self, emaciated, scarred, running on synthesized compounds and sheer willpower. But her mind had never been sharper, honed by constant challenges and fueled by the knowledge that she wasn't just fighting for herself, but for humanity's future. Domain 700 was different from all previous challenges. As Eliza entered, she found herself in a perfect recreation of the Curiosity's bridge, the research vessel that had been destroyed 6 months earlier. Seated at various stations were simulations of her crew. People she had served with. People who had died while she survived. "Captain on deck," announced her first officer, Lee Patel, standing from the command chair. Eliza froze, knowing this wasn't real but unable to control the surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. "This is cruel," she said, addressing the unseen Vraxians. "Even for you." No response came except from the simulated crew, who behaved exactly as their real counterparts would have. They reported ship status, asked for orders, made the same jokes and used the same mannerisms that Eliza remembered with painful clarity. She understood the test immediately. This was about emotional manipulation, forcing her to relive her greatest failure while still requiring her to function as a leader. With a deep breath, Eliza stepped fully onto the bridge. "Status report," she ordered, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. For the next 48 hours, she commanded the simulated Curiosity through a series of crises identical to those that had led to its destruction. Only this time, with the foreknowledge of what was coming in 60 days of Gauntlet-honed problem-solving skills, she found solutions where before there had been none. When the simulation ended with the Curiosity safely navigating the crisis, Eliza stood alone on the bridge, tears streaming down her face. The simulated crew had vanished, leaving her with the bittersweet knowledge that she had succeeded where reality had failed her. "Why this test?" she asked the empty room. "What were you hoping to prove?" The Vraxian voice responded after a long pause. "That humans are controlled by emotional attachments. That your decisions are compromised by irrational connections to others." Eliza wiped her tears away. "And what did you learn instead?" That such attachments can be strengthening rather than weakening. An unexpected observation. She laughed bitterly. You wanted to break me with guilt and grief. Instead, you gave me a chance to honor my crew by saving them, even in simulation. The voice didn't respond, but Domain 700 faded away, replaced by the entrance to Domain 701. Eliza squared her shoulders and moved forward. 70 days into the 100-year test, she had completed over 700 domains. The remaining 300 stretched before her, each undoubtedly designed to be more impossible than the last, but impossible had long since lost its meaning for Captain Eliza Chen. In the Vraxian Command Center, the atmosphere had shifted from initial alarm to stunned disbelief to a sort of reluctant fascination. The Grand Arbiter had not left the observation post for 14 consecutive cycles, watching as the human female defied every prediction and overcame every obstacle. Domain 900, announced a technician as Eliza Chen entered a realm designed to test temporal cognition, the ability to process information across multiple timelines simultaneously. She cannot possibly overcome this one, muttered Kex, who had become something of an unwilling Chen expert over the past 70 days. The neurological architecture required simply doesn't exist in human brains. The Arbiter said nothing, compound eyes fixed on the display as Chen paused at the domain entrance, swaying slightly with exhaustion. Medical readings showed she was operating at extreme biological limits: multiple stress fractures in her bones, muscle degradation, neurochemical imbalances that should have rendered her unconscious days ago, yet she moved forward, her expression set with the same determination it had shown on day 1.3 hours later. Alarms blared across the command center as Chen solved the supposedly impossible temporal puzzle using a method that left the Vraxian analysts baffled. She didn't process the timelines simultaneously, explained the lead cognitive specialist, mandibles clicking in agitation. She treated them as spatial rather than temporal dimensions and mapped them accordingly. Impossible, Kex insisted. The computational requirements alone, she didn't compute it, interrupted the specialist. She visualized it. Used pattern recognition rather than sequential analysis. The Arbiter tilted its elongated head. Interesting. Domain 950 presented a philosophical challenge about the nature of consciousness itself, a problem that had stymied Vraxian philosophers for millennia. Chen solved it in under an hour by proposing a framework that rendered the ancient paradox irrelevant through a perspective shift so fundamental that several Vraxian observers requested memory suppression to process the cognitive dissonance. By the time she reached Domain 999, on her 84th day in the Gauntlet, even the most skeptical Vraxians had fallen silent. They watched as this single human, malnourished, injured, and operating on willpower that defied biochemical explanation, approached the final challenge. What is Domain 1000? The Arbiter asked quietly. The chief architect of the Gauntlet hesitated. It is a synthesis. The ultimate test of integrated capability. No species has ever reached it, so its parameters have never been activated. Activate them now, ordered the Arbiter. Let us see the conclusion of this unexpected experiment. Eliza stood at the threshold of Domain 1000, her body trembling with fatigue and the cocktail of stimulants keeping her conscious. The past 84 days had transformed her physically, mentally, perhaps even spiritually. She had faced death countless times, had solved puzzles designed to be unsolvable, had pushed the very limits of human capability, and now, one final test remained. As she stepped into the domain, she found herself in a vast, empty white space that stretched infinitely in all directions. No challenges presented themselves. No puzzles appeared. Just emptiness. Is this it? She called out, her voice raspy from underuse. The grand finale is nothing? A figure materialized before her, a perfect replica of herself as she had been on day one. Healthy, strong, determined. Not nothing, her doppelganger replied. Everything. The white space suddenly filled with projection scenes from every domain she had conquered, every challenge she had overcome. They played simultaneously around her in a dizzying array of images and sounds. Domain 1000 is integration, explained her double. The ability to synthesize all knowledge, all experience, all capability demonstrated throughout the Gauntlet. Eliza frowned. And how exactly am I supposed to demonstrate that? Her double smiled. By choosing. The projections coalesced into distinct pathways stretching out before her, each representing a different outcome for humanity's future relationship with the collective. Point 1 showed human worlds peacefully coexisting with Vraxian colonies, sharing technology and resources. Another depicted humans segregated to their own sector of space, contained but not destroyed. A third revealed humans subjugated, their innovations harvested while their population was controlled. A fourth showed humans ascending to dominance, the Vraxian Collective diminished under human authority. "This is your final test," said her double. "Choose humanity's future. The path that best represents what you have learned." Eliza studied each pathway carefully, understanding that this was the true purpose of the entire gauntlet, not merely to test capability, but to determine what a species would do with that capability once proven. After long consideration, she turned away from all 4 pathways. "No," she said simply, her double tilted its head in a gesture eerily reminiscent of the Vraxians. "You must choose." "I reject the premise," Eliza countered. "These choices presuppose that either humanity or the collective must dominate or be dominated. That's exactly the kind of binary thinking that created this conflict in the first place." She gestured at the countless projections still swirling around them. "I've spent 84 days demonstrating that humans excel at finding third options, at reframing problems, at seeing patterns and connections where others see only separation." Eliza stepped forward, her eyes blazing with intensity despite her physical exhaustion. "Here's my choice: partnership. Not dominance, not containment, not segregation. True partnership based on complementary strengths. You fear our adaptability because it threatens your orderly progression. We could benefit from your stability and long-term perspective. Together, we could achieve more than either civilization could alone."